Before it began, Egypt was eternal. That was not opinion, that was fact. Or so every living soul from Memphis to Thebes believed with absolute, unshakable certainty. For over 2,000 years, the empire of the Nile had endured. Its pyramids scraped the heavens, its armies crushed nations, its priests commanded magic that could, they claimed, bend the fabric of reality. And above it all, a pantheon of gods, over 2,000 strong, sustained every sunrise, every harvest, every breath. Ra pulled the sun across the sky. Hapi flooded the Nile each year to feed the fields. Isis wielded magic that could raise the dead. Osiris ruled the afterlife. And Pharaoh, the living god, the incarnation of Horus on earth, sat on a golden throne as the divine link between heaven and the black soil of Egypt. It was perfect. It was unchallengeable. It was the most sophisticated religious civilization the ancient world had ever produced. And then a man walked out of the desert. He was 80 years old. He carried a shepherd's staff. He spoke with a stutter, and he delivered a message from a god that Egypt had never heard of. A god with no temple, no statue, no priesthood, worshipped by a nation of slaves making bricks in the mud pits of the delta. The message was simple.
Let my people go.
Let my people go. Pharaoh laughed. He should not have laughed. Because what followed was not a natural disaster. It was not bad luck. It was not climate change or volcanic fallout or a series of unfortunate ecological events, though scholars have proposed all of these. What followed was a systematic, targeted, merciless dismantling of the entire Egyptian pantheon, god by god, domain by domain. 10 strikes, each one aimed at a specific deity's throat: the Nile, the sky, the sun itself, and finally, the throne. This is the story of the 10 plagues, not as children's Sunday school lessons, not as metaphor, but as what the ancient texts describe them to be: a war between gods, and the total annihilation of the losing side. If this is your first time on the Ancient Codex, subscribe now. What we uncover in the next 45 minutes will change the way you read the Book of Exodus forever. Chapter 1. The Water and the Earth. Plagues 1 through 3. To understand the first plague, you must first understand what the Nile meant to Egypt. And meant is far too weak a word. The Nile did not merely sustain Egypt. The Nile was Egypt. Without it, the entire civilization was a sand dune. Every year, between June and September, the river flooded. It swelled with the rains of the Ethiopian highlands thousands of miles to the south, surged northward, and spilled across its banks, depositing a layer of rich, dark, nutrient-dense silt across the floodplain. The Egyptians called this soil Kemet, the Black Land. It is from this word that Egypt derives its ancient name. The Black Land was life. The Red Land, the desert on either side, was death, and the line between them was drawn by the river. The god who controlled this was Hapi. Not to be confused with the funerary deity of the same name, this Hapi, spelled with a different hieroglyph, though the transliteration is identical, was the god of the annual inundation. He was depicted as an androgynous figure with a heavy, rounded belly, pendulous breasts symbolizing nourishment, and blue or green skin representing the life-giving water.
He wore a crown of papyrus in Lower Egypt and lotus in Upper Egypt. He was celebrated with festivals, hymns, and offerings thrown directly into the river. The hymn to Hapi, preserved on Papyrus Salier II and dating to approximately 1250 BCE, within the very time frame of the Exodus, declares, "Hail to you, Hapi, sprung from earth, come to nourish Egypt. If he is sluggish, noses clog, everyone is impoverished. If he rises, the land is in exultation, every belly rejoices." Hapi was not a minor god. He was the guarantor of survival. And the first plague killed him. Exodus chapter 7, verse 20. Aaron raised the staff and struck the water of the Nile, and in the sight of Pharaoh and his officials, the entire river turned to blood. Not metaphorical blood, not reddish water, not algae bloom, though scholars like Greta Hort have proposed that a dinoflagellate called Osculatoria rubescens could have caused a red coloration. The text is unambiguous. Dam, blood. The fish died. The river stank. The Egyptians could not drink from it. And it was not just the river. Exodus chapter 7 verse 19 says, "It was all the waters of Egypt, including streams, canals, ponds, and even water stored in wooden and stone vessels." Water sitting in jars inside Egyptian homes turned to blood. Think about what that means. This was not a localized event. This was a supernatural transformation of every molecule of Egyptian water simultaneously. There was no natural hiding place, no well to dig, no stored supply to fall back on. Egypt, a desert nation utterly dependent on a single water source, had that source converted into a symbol of death. And the theological message was devastating. The Nile was not just Hapi's domain. In Egyptian cosmology, the river was the bloodstream of Osiris himself. Osiris, the murdered and resurrected god, ruler of the afterlife, the deity whose mythology was the single most important narrative in Egyptian religion. When Osiris was killed by his brother Set, his body was scattered across Egypt. The Nile's annual flood was interpreted as Osiris's tears, or in deeper theological readings, as his very blood flowing through the land, bringing life to the soil, as his death brought life to the underworld. Yahweh took that metaphor and made it literal. You say the Nile is divine blood? Fine, here is blood, real blood, and it is killing everything it touches. The Nile was also guarded by Khnum, the ram-headed god who sat at the cataracts near Elephantine Island, the mythological source of the river, controlling the caverns from which the waters flowed. Khnum's name means to create. He was a potter god who shaped human children on his celestial wheel and placed them in their mothers' wombs. He could not protect his river. He could not filter the blood. His domain was violated from source to delta. And then there was Sobek, the crocodile god, lord of the marshes, associated with Nile fertility and military power. His sacred animals, the Nile crocodiles, which were literally worshipped in temples at Kamambo and Fayum, adorned with gold and fed sacred food, died choking in the blood alongside the fish. The Egyptian magicians, the Hartumim, almost certainly priests trained in Heka, the sacred institutional magic of the Egyptian state, responded by doing the only thing they could. They replicated the plague. Exodus chapter 7 verse 20. The Egyptian magicians did the same things by their secret arts. Let the absurdity of that settle. The Nile had turned to blood, and Egypt's response was to turn more water into blood. They could mimic the destruction. They could not reverse it. Their magic was a mirror. It could copy, but it could not heal. And in that failure, the first crack appeared in the wall of Egyptian theological certainty. The plague lasted 7 days. 7, the number of divine completion. Plague 2, the frogs. Exodus chapter 8 describes an invasion that sounds almost comical until you understand the theological horror underneath it. Frogs came up out of the Nile and covered the land. They entered houses, they climbed into beds, they crawled into ovens, the tanur, the clay bread oven that was the center of every Egyptian kitchen. They infested kneading troughs where dough was prepared. They were in the clothing, in the grain stores, in the drinking vessels, on the sleeping mats. There was no space in Egypt without frogs. The target was Heket. Heket was the frog goddess, depicted as a frog or a woman with the head of a frog. She was the goddess of fertility, childbirth, and the final stages of the Nile flood, when life emerged from the receding waters. Midwives in Egypt bore the title servants of Heket. Pregnant women wore frog-shaped amulets for protection during labor. The frog was sacred, a symbol of regeneration, of life rising from water and mud. Killing a frog was, in many contexts, considered an offense against the gods. And now there were frogs in every bed in Egypt, in every oven, in every cup.
The diabolical genius of this plague was its weaponization of the sacred. The Egyptians could not simply exterminate the frogs. They were holy. But they also could not live with them. Every meal was contaminated. Every sleeping surface was occupied. Every step risked crushing a sacred animal underfoot. Heket's blessing had become Heket's curse, and her own people were trapped between reverence and revulsion. The magicians again responded by producing more frogs. The pattern was becoming a dark joke. Egypt's best supernatural practitioners could only amplify the problem. And this time, Pharaoh broke, partially. He summoned Moses and Aaron and made a request that contained an extraordinary admission. "Pray to the Lord to take the frogs away from me and my people. Pray to the Lord, not to Ra, not to Isis, not to Thoth, the god of magic, to Yahweh, the foreign god of slaves." For the first time, Pharaoh acknowledged, however reluctantly, that the solution lay outside the Egyptian religious system. His gods could not help him. Only the God of the Hebrews could. Moses gave Pharaoh the honor of choosing when the frogs would die. Pharaoh said, "Tomorrow." And when tomorrow came, every frog in Egypt died simultaneously. They piled them in heaps, vast rotting mounds of sacred animals decomposing in the Egyptian sun. Exodus 8:14, the land reeked. The stench of Heket's failure hung over Egypt like a funeral shroud. Plague 3. The dust of the earth became lice. The Hebrew word is kinim, and scholars have debated for centuries whether it refers to lice, gnats, fleas, or mosquitoes. The Septuagint translates it as skniffis, gnats. Josephus calls them lice. The distinction barely matters. What matters is the mechanism. Aaron struck the dust, and the very ground of Egypt came alive with biting, swarming, inescapable insects. Every grain of sand, every particle of soil, the earth itself turned hostile. The target was Geb. Geb was the god of the earth, one of the Ennead, the 9 supreme deities of the Heliopolitan creation myth. He was literally the ground. In Egyptian cosmology, Geb lay on his back as the earth, and his sister wife Nut arched above him as the sky, separated by their father Shu, the god of air. Geb's body was every field, every road, every foundation. The soil of Egypt was sacred because it was Geb. And now Geb's body was producing parasites. But the true devastation of the third plague was not theological, it was institutional. Egyptian priests maintained extraordinary standards of ritual purity. Herodotus, the Egyptian historian who visited Egypt around 450 BCE, recorded that Egyptian priests shaved their entire bodies every 3 days to prevent any lice or parasitic impurity. They washed in cold water twice during the day and twice at night. They wore only clean linen garments. Ritual purity was not a suggestion, it was an absolute prerequisite for entering a temple and serving the gods. The lice made the entire priesthood of Egypt unclean. Every priest, every temple servant, every sacred functionary who maintained the daily rituals, the offerings, the prayers, the opening of the shrine doors that were believed to sustain the gods themselves. The infestation rendered them all impure, unable to perform their duties. The temples of Egypt, the engines of divine power, went dark, not because the buildings were destroyed, but because the people who operated them could no longer approach the altars. And then came the moment that changed everything. Exodus 8:18-19. The magicians tried to produce gnats by their secret arts, but they could not. And the magicians said to Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God." The magicians failed. For the first time, Egyptian sacred magic, Heka, the institutional supernatural power channeled through Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and sorcery, could not replicate what Yahweh had done. The staff of Moses had surpassed the rods of the magicians. The power of Yahweh had exceeded the power of Thoth. And the magicians themselves admitted it. This is the finger of God. The Hebrew phrase is Etzba Elohim, and the use of Elohim rather than Yahweh is significant. The magicians were not converting. They were using their own theological framework to describe what they were witnessing. They were saying, "This is not Heka. This is not mortal magic. This is the digit of a supreme divine being, a power so vast that what we have witnessed is merely the casual gesture of its smallest appendage." From this point forward, the magicians disappear from the narrative. They are never mentioned again as attempting to counter the plagues. Egyptian supernatural defense system, its magic, its priesthood, its institutional connection to the divine, was neutralized. 3 plagues, 3 gods destroyed. The Nile was blood, the sacred frogs were rotting in heaps, the earth itself had turned against its people. The magicians had surrendered, the temples were unserviced. And they were only at the beginning. Chapter 2. The Swarms and the Sickness. Plagues 4-6. 3 plagues had fallen. The Nile had bled. The sacred frogs had rotted in heaps. The dust had turned to parasites. The magicians had surrendered. But Pharaoh's heart remained hard. The text of Exodus uses a Hebrew phrase that has haunted theologians for 3,000 years. Vaychezek lev Paro, the heart of Pharaoh was hardened. Whether that hardening was Pharaoh's own stubborn pride or a divine act of judicial hardening, and scholars from Augustine to Calvin to modern Jewish commentators have debated this endlessly, the result was the same. The plagues continued, and they escalated. Because with the fourth plague, something changed. Something fundamental shifted in the rules of engagement. Plague 4, the swarms. The Hebrew word is arov, and its exact meaning has been debated for millennia. The Septuagint translates it as kunomuia, dogfly, a biting fly. The Midrash interprets it as a mixture, a swarm of every conceivable species of biting, stinging, crawling insect and wild beast. Josephus describes it as a diverse plague of creatures Egypt had never before encountered. Some rabbinical sources include scorpions, wasps, and venomous serpents in the swarm. But there is a deeper possibility that many scholars find compelling. The word arov shares a root with erev, mixture or evening, and one of Egypt's most sacred insects was the scarab beetle, Scarabaeus sacrae, the living symbol of the god Khepri. Khepri was the god of the rising sun, creation, and renewal. He was depicted as a scarab beetle, or a man with a scarab for a head, rolling the sun across the sky each morning, just as the dung beetle rolls its ball of dung across the earth. The scarab was arguably the single most ubiquitous sacred symbol in Egyptian culture. Scarab amulets were placed over the hearts of mummies to ensure safe passage through the afterlife. They were carved into rings, pressed into seals, built into temple architecture. Every Egyptian who has ever been excavated from a tomb was buried with scarabs. If the arov included scarab beetles, and several scholars have proposed this, then the fourth plague was another weaponization of the sacred. Egypt's most beloved divine insect, the symbol of rebirth and solar renewal, became part of a swarm that ruined the land. But the theological significance of Plague 4 extends beyond its target, because this is the plague where Yahweh introduced a concept that shook the Egyptian worldview to its foundations, the divine distinction. Exodus 8:22-23. But on that day I will set apart the land of Goshen, where my people dwell, so that no swarms of flies shall be there, that ye may know that I am the Lord in the midst of the earth. I will put a division between my people and your people. The Hebrew word translated division is pedut, redemption, distinction, separation, and what it meant in practice was this: the same swarms destroying Egyptian homes, covering Egyptian food, biting Egyptian flesh, stopped at an invisible border. The Hebrew settlement in the eastern delta was untouched, not because of geography, not because of wind patterns, because Yahweh drew a line. No Egyptian god had ever demonstrated this level of precision. Ra did not choose which homes to illuminate. Hapi did not select which fields to flood. The Egyptian gods were forces, vast, impersonal, operating by cosmic rhythm. They did not discriminate. Yahweh did. He could target his plague down to the household level, sparing the enslaved while devastating the enslaver. This was not just power. This was intelligence. This was a God who saw, who chose, who decided.
and the implications for every Egyptian watching were terrifying. Your gods are weather. This god is a general. Plague 5. The death of the livestock. Exodus 9:3. The hand of the Lord will bring a terrible plague on your livestock in the field, on your horses, donkeys, camels, cattle, sheep, and goats. This was economic annihilation disguised as disease. The livestock of Egypt, every horse, donkey, camel, cow, sheep, and goat, was struck by a devastating pestilence. The Hebrew word is dever, a severe, fast-acting plague, mass death across the entire agricultural and military infrastructure. Chariot horses, the backbone of Egypt's military supremacy, dead. Oxen used for plowing and transport, dead. Wool-producing sheep and goats, dead. The protein supply of a nation, gone. But the true horror was theological, because Egypt did not merely own animals, Egypt worshipped them. Hathor, one of the most beloved goddesses in the Egyptian pantheon, was the cow goddess. She was depicted as a cow, or as a beautiful woman wearing a crown of cow's horns with a golden sun disk between them. She was the goddess of love, beauty, music, joy, and motherhood. She was the Eye of Ra, one of the most powerful manifestations of solar divine power. Her sacred cattle were kept in temple compounds across Egypt. They were anointed, decorated, worshipped, and when they died, they were mummified with full divine honors. The plague killed them. Hathor's physical vessels, the animals through which she was literally present on earth, rotted in the fields.
Then there was Apis, the sacred bull of Memphis, perhaps the single most important animal in all of Egypt. The Apis bull was not merely sacred, he was the living incarnation of the creator god Ptah, and later, upon death, became Osiris Apis, Serapis. Only one Apis bull existed at a time, identified by a precise set of physical markings described by Herodotus: a black hide, a white diamond on the forehead, a mark shaped like an eagle on the back, double hairs on the tail, and a scarab mark under the tongue. When an Apis bull died of natural causes, the mourning was national. The bull was mummified in a ceremony rivaling that of Pharaoh himself and interred in the Serapeum at Saqqara, a vast underground necropolis of granite sarcophagi, each weighing over 60 tons, that archaeologists have excavated and which you can visit to this day. If the pestilence killed the reigning Apis bull, and the text implies that all Egyptian livestock perished, it would have been interpreted not as an animal dying, but as a god dying. Ptah, the creator, killed in his physical form, in the temple of Memphis by a god no Egyptian had ever worshipped. Ad Nevis, the sacred bull of Heliopolis, incarnation of Ra-Atum, the sun god in his creator aspect. Add the sacred rams of Amun at Thebes and Khnum at Elephantine. Add the sacred goats of Barneb-Jedet at Mendis. Every sacred animal, every physical vessel of divine presence was struck down, and not a single Israelite animal died. Exodus 9 verse 7. Pharaoh investigated and found that not even one of the animals of the Israelites had died. He investigated. He sent officials to check. He could not believe it. And what they found was exactly what Yahweh had promised: surgical precision. Egyptian livestock dead, Hebrew livestock untouched. Same region, same climate, same water, different God. Plague 6. The boils. Exodus 9 verse 10 to 11. They took soot from a furnace and stood before Pharaoh. Moses tossed it into the air, and festering boils broke out on humans and animals throughout all the land of Egypt. The magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils that were on them and on all the Egyptians. Every word of this passage is loaded. First, the soot. Moses took it from a furnace, a kibshan, a brick kiln. This is the same type of furnace that the Hebrew slaves had been forced to operate. Exodus 1 verse 14 tells us the Egyptians worked the Hebrews ruthlessly, making them build with mortar and brick. Exodus 5 describes Pharaoh's cruel decree that the Hebrews gather their own straw while maintaining the same brick quotas. The furnace was the symbol of Hebrew enslavement, and now its soot, the residue of Hebrew suffering, became the instrument of Egyptian agony. The ash of oppression was thrown into the air and fell on the oppressor's skin as festering, weeping boils. There is a poetic justice so precise that it reads as divine irony. You made them work the kilns, and now the kilns are making you suffer. Third, the targets. The boils struck everyone, but the text specifically names the magicians. The magicians could not stand before Moses. They could not stand. The priests of Thoth, the practitioners of Heka, the men who had replicated the first 2 plagues and had declared this is the finger of God at the third, were now physically incapacitated, covered in boils, unable to perform rituals, unable to stand in the presence of the power that had broken them. This was the final defeat of Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of war and pestilence. Sekhmet was one of the most feared deities in the Egyptian pantheon. She was believed to send plagues as punishment and to heal them as mercy. Her priests were the physicians of Egypt, the original doctor priests, combining medicine and magic. The Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest medical documents in human history, contains incantations to Sekhmet alongside practical medical treatments. She could not prevent the boils. She could not heal them. Her own priests were the victims. Isis, the great goddess of magic, whose spells were said to be more powerful than 1,000 soldiers, who had resurrected her murdered husband Osiris, who had tricked Ra himself into revealing his secret name, could not heal a single Egyptian skin. Imhotep, the deified architect and physician, worshipped as the god of medicine for over 2,000 years, identified by the Greeks with Asclepius, was powerless. The entire medical, magical infrastructure of the most advanced civilization on Earth was prostrate. The healers could not heal themselves. The magicians could not stand. The physicians could not cure. And the soot of Hebrew furnaces was still falling from the sky. 6 plagues. The Nile dead, the earth corrupted, the sacred animals weaponized and then slaughtered, the magic broken, the priests physically destroyed, the economy collapsing. But the worst was yet to come, because the next 3 plagues would not merely attack Egypt's gods, they would attack Egypt's sky, its harvest, and its sun. Chapter 3. The Sky Falls. Plagues 7 through 9. The first 6 plagues had been devastating, but they had followed a certain logic of escalation. Water, earth, air, flesh, each one intensifying the pressure, each one dismantling another pillar of the Egyptian divine framework. But with Plague 7, the war entered a new phase. The sky turned against Egypt. And for a civilization that looked upward for salvation, whose supreme god was the sun, whose cosmology was written in the stars, whose goddess Nut was literally the sky itself, this was not just a plague, this was the beginning of the end. Plague 7. Hail and Fire. Exodus 9:24. So there was hail and fire mingled with the hail, very grievous, such as had never been in all the land of Egypt since it became a nation. That phrase, "since it became a nation," is the Bible's way of saying this was unprecedented in the entirety of Egyptian history. Not in living memory, not in recorded history. Since the civilization began, nothing like this had ever happened. And the description is physically paradoxical. Hail, frozen water, and fire, active combustion, existing simultaneously. Ice that burns, fire that does not melt ice. The Hebrew phrase esh mitlakachat betok chabarad describes something that violates natural law. Medieval commentators struggled with the physics. Rashi, the great French rabbi of the 11th century, compared it to a glass lantern, fire contained within ice, each preserving the other by divine decree. Modern rationalists have proposed volcanic lightning, pyroclastic storms from the eruption of Thera, Santorini, or cumulonimbus supercells as explanations. But the text is not describing weather. It is describing a targeted divine weapon, because once again, Goshen was untouched. The primary target was Nut, the sky goddess. Nut was one of the most visually striking deities in all Egyptian art. She was depicted as a woman arching over the earth, her elongated body spanning from horizon to horizon, her skin painted dark blue and covered with golden stars. Her fingers and toes touched the earth at the cardinal points. Every evening she swallowed the sun at the western horizon, carried it through her starry body during the night, and gave birth to it again at dawn from the eastern horizon. She was the barrier between the ordered cosmos, Mat, and the primordial chaos of Nun that existed beyond the sky. She was protection, she was shelter, she was the ceiling of existence. And now her body was raining destruction. The sky that Nut was supposed to guard had become a weapon, fire and ice falling from her domain on the people she was supposed to shelter. Every hailstone was a failure. Every lightning strike was a humiliation. The goddess who swallowed the sun could not stop ice from killing Egyptian children in the fields. Shu, the god of air and atmosphere, who held Nut above Geb, was equally impotent. The space between heaven and earth, his domain, was filled with burning ice that he could not control.
And there was a bitter irony in the involvement of Seth. Set, Sutek, was the god of storms, deserts, foreigners, and chaos. He was the villain of Egyptian mythology, the murderer of Osiris, and yet he was also a complex figure who served Ra by defending the solar bark against the chaos serpent Apophis each night. The Ramesside dynasty, the dynasty that almost certainly includes the pharaoh of the Exodus, specifically venerated Seth. Ramesses II's father was Seti I, literally man of Seth. The royal capital Ramesses contained a major temple to Seth. The storm god's own dynasty was being destroyed by a storm. Seth's power, chaos, violence, atmospheric fury was being used against his own worshippers by a god who commanded chaos as easily as he commanded order. But there was a new element in Plague 7 that had not appeared before, a grace note in the midst of divine warfare. Exodus 9:20-21. Those officials of Pharaoh who feared the word of the Lord hurried to bring their slaves and their livestock inside, but those who ignored the word of the Lord left their slaves and livestock in the field. For the first time, individual Egyptians were given a choice. Yahweh issued a warning before the plague fell, and those who heeded it, those who feared the word of the Lord, could save themselves and their property. This was not genocide. This was not indiscriminate destruction. This was a God offering mercy to individuals, even while destroying the system they served. The war was against Pharaoh and his gods, not against every Egyptian soul. Some Egyptians chose wisely. They brought their animals indoors. They took shelter. They survived. Others did not. Renen-Utet, the cobra goddess of the harvest, watched helplessly as the flax and barley were destroyed. The wheat and spelt survived only because they matured later in the season. Egypt's agricultural calendar, for once, provided a narrow reprieve. But that reprieve was temporary. Plague 8. The Locusts. Exodus 10:14-15. They invaded all Egypt and settled down in every area of the country in great numbers. Never before had there been such a plague of locusts, nor will there ever be again. They covered all the ground until it was black. They devoured all that was left after the hail, everything growing in the fields and the fruit on the trees. Nothing green remained on tree or plant in all the land of Egypt. Nothing green remained. Read that sentence again. Let it settle into the agricultural reality of the ancient world, where there were no refrigerated supply chains, no international food aid, no grain reserves flown in from overseas. Egypt's food was what Egypt grew, and what Egypt grew was now inside the stomachs of 1 billion locusts. The east wind that brought them itself was significant. In Egyptian cosmology, the east was associated with rebirth, the direction of the rising sun, of Khepri's daily renewal. The east wind of rebirth brought the wind of famine. The targets were the agricultural gods, and by this point the list is almost cruel in its comprehensiveness. Min, the god of fertility and the harvest, the phallic deity celebrated in the Min festival at the conclusion of each agricultural season. He guaranteed abundance. He delivered starvation. Osiris, in his aspect as the green god of vegetation, the deity whose death and resurrection was mirrored in the annual planting and harvesting cycle. The green Osiris was now presiding over a landscape with no green at all. Renen-Utet struck for a second time, the cobra harvest goddess doubly humiliated. But the real devastation of Plague 8 was political, not theological.
Pharaoh's own court broke. Exodus 10, verse 7. Pharaoh's officials said to him, "How long will this man be a snare to us? Let the people go so that they may worship the Lord their God. Do you not yet realize that Egypt is destroyed? Do you not yet realize that Egypt is destroyed?" This is the voice of the Egyptian government, the viziers, the nomarchs, the military commanders, the bureaucratic infrastructure that had administered the most powerful empire on earth for 2 millennia, telling their living God that he has lost. The regime was fracturing. The men who ran the empire on behalf of Pharaoh were openly dissenting. The chain of divine authority that descended from Ra through Pharaoh to the governing class was snapping, link by link. Pharaoh attempted a compromise. He offered to let the Hebrew men go, but keep the women and children. Moses refused. Pharaoh exploded with rage and expelled him from his presence. And the locusts came. When they had consumed everything, Yahweh sent a powerful west wind that lifted the locusts and drove them into the Red Sea, the Yam Suf. Not a single locust remained, but the food was gone. The fields were bare soil. The trees were stripped skeletons. Egypt was starving. Plague 9, the darkness. And this is the plague that destroyed the center of the Egyptian universe. Exodus 10:21-23. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand toward the sky, so that darkness spreads over Egypt, darkness that can be felt." So Moses stretched out his hand toward the sky, and total darkness covered all Egypt for 3 days. No one could see another person. No one could move from their position for 3 days. Think about what that means in practical terms. No cooking, no water retrieval, no care for children, the sick, or the elderly, no temple services, no government functions, no military operations. Total civilizational paralysis. Egypt, the most organized, most bureaucratic, most systematically administered civilization on earth, was frozen in place by darkness for 3 days. And the target was the beating heart of everything Egypt believed. Ra. Amun-Ra, the king of the gods, the supreme deity, the Son incarnate, the most powerful, most visible, most undeniable God in the Egyptian theological system. Ra was not merely important, Ra was foundational. The sun's daily journey across the sky in the Manjet, the solar bark, the boat of millions of years, was the central organizing narrative of Egyptian religion. Every morning, Ra was born as Khepri on the eastern horizon. At noon, he blazed as Ra in his full glory. At evening, he became Atum, the old man, descending into the western horizon. During the 12 hours of night, he traveled through the Duat, the underworld, battling the chaos serpent Apophis, who attempted to swallow the sun and prevent its rebirth each dawn. Every Egyptian temple was oriented toward the sun. Every prayer cycle was structured around Ra's journey. Pharaoh's very title, Sa-Ra, son of Ra, derived his divine legitimacy from the sun god. The sun was not a celestial body, it was God. It was proof. Every single morning when the sun rose, it was confirmation that Ma'at, cosmic order, truth, justice, still reigned. The sun's rising was Egypt's daily evidence that its gods were real. And for 3 days, the sun did not rise. Ra was not defeated, Ra was erased. The most visible god in the ancient world became invisible. The proof of Egyptian theology vanished from the sky. For 3 days, every Egyptian sat in darkness, wondering, is this how the world ends? Is this the return to Nun, the primordial chaos, the formless abyss that existed before creation? Have we been uncreated? Atum, the setting sun, the god who emerged from Nun to create the world, could not emerge again. Khepri, the rising sun, the scarab of rebirth, could not roll the sun above the horizon. Thoth, god of the moon, provided no moonlight. Hathor, the eye of Ra, was blinded. Seshat, goddess of the stars and record-keeping, had no stars to read. Every celestial deity in Egypt's sky, solar, lunar, stellar, was extinguished simultaneously. And in Goshen, in the settlements of the Hebrew slaves, there was light. The theological message was the most devastating yet. Your supreme God is dead. The God of your slaves is the one providing light. The God you have never heard of, the God with no temple and no statue and no priesthood. He controls the sun. Ra does not. This was not merely a plague. This was a cosmological argument. Yahweh was declaring, in terms no Egyptian could understand, I am the one who said, "Let there be light," and I am the one who can take it away. 9 plagues, 9 gods destroyed. The water, the earth, the air, the animals, the flesh, the sky, the harvest, and the sun, all conquered. The entire Egyptian divine infrastructure lay in ruins. The magicians were broken, the priesthood was unclean, the government was fractured, the economy was collapsed, the people were starving in the dark. And there was still one more, the worst one, the one that would not merely humiliate a god, but kill one.
This is the night. Of all the nights in the Hebrew Bible, of all the nights in the collective memory of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, this is the one that echoes loudest. This is the night that created a people, the night that broke an empire, the night that split history into before and after. The 10th plague was not like the others. The first 9 had attacked domains, water, earth, air, sky, animals, agriculture, the sun. They had humiliated gods by proving their impotence in their own spheres of influence. But the 10th plague did not attack a domain. It attacked a dynasty. The instructions came through Moses, and they were specific, terrifyingly specific. Exodus 12, 3-7, tell the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, each man is to take a lamb for his family. The animals you choose must be year-old males without defect. Take care of them until the 14th day of the month, when all the members of the community of Israel must slaughter them at twilight. Then they are to take some of the blood and put it on the sides and tops of the door frames of the houses where they eat the lambs. A lamb, without defect, selected on the 10th day, kept for 4 days, watched, inspected, bonded with, then slaughtered at twilight on the 14th, its blood painted on the doorposts and the lintel, the 2 vertical frames and the horizontal beam above, creating in the geometry of an ancient doorway the shape of a cross, or, in the Hebrew reading, the shape of the Hebrew letter Het, the letter that begins the word Chai, meaning life. Blood on the door. Life on the door, protection through sacrifice. But consider what this act meant in the Egyptian context. The lamb was sacred. Rams and lambs were associated with multiple Egyptian deities. Amun, the king of the gods, was the ram-headed deity of Thebes. Khnum, the ram-headed creator, shaped children on his celestial potter's wheel.
Bane-Ebjadet, the ram god of Mendes, was associated with the soul of Osiris himself. The Hebrews were being told to take a sacred Egyptian animal, slaughter it publicly, drain its blood, paint that blood on their doors for all to see, and then eat the animal for dinner. This was not merely a ritual. This was an act of visible, deliberate theological defiance. In the darkest hour of the Egyptian crisis, with the empire starving, blinded, broken, and covered in boils, the Hebrew slaves publicly killed the sacred Egyptian animals, smeared their blood on their houses, and sat down to eat them with their shoes on. If any image captures the total inversion of power that the plagues represent, it is this: the slaves eating the gods of their masters. Exodus 12:29. At midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn in Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on the throne to the firstborn of the prisoner who was in the dungeon, and the firstborn of all the livestock as well. At midnight, the pivot of the night, the darkest hour, the moment when Ra was deepest in the Duat, battling Apophis, furthest from Egypt, least able to protect. The destroyer came. The Hebrew text uses the word ha-mashhit, the destroyer, the ruiner. Later tradition calls this entity the angel of death, the Malach ha-mavet. The text does not describe its form, it does not describe its method, it simply describes its result. Every firstborn male in Egypt died. Every single one. From the firstborn of Pharaoh, the crown prince, the heir to the throne of the two lands, the next Horus, to the firstborn of the slave grinding grain in the dungeon, from the wealthiest nomarch to the poorest widow, from the palace to the prison, from Thebes to Memphis to Ramesses, simultaneously, instantly, without distinction of class, without regard for wealth or power or status. The only distinction that mattered was the blood on the door. Where there was blood, lamb's blood, a sacred Egyptian animal painted in the shape of life on the doorframe, the destroyer passed over that door. Pesach, Passover. The Hebrew word means to pass over, to skip, to spare. The entity saw the blood and moved past that door. Where there was no blood, where Egyptian gods were relied upon for protection, where Isis was supposed to shield, where Sekhmet was supposed to guard, where the uraeus of Wadjet on Pharaoh's crown was supposed to repel all threats, the destroyer entered and took. Exodus 12:30. Pharaoh and all his officials and all the Egyptians got up during the night, and there was loud wailing in Egypt, for there was not a house without someone dead. Not a house without someone dead. Pass the mathematics of that. Egypt's population in the New Kingdom is estimated at 3 to 5 million people. Every household that had a firstborn male, which is statistically most of them, lost that person in a single night. The economic loss was incalculable. The firstborn son was the primary heir, the manager of the family estate, the one trained to continue the craft, the business, the military commission. In one night, Egypt lost a generation of its leadership class. But the true destruction was theological, and it centered on one death above all, the death of Pharaoh's firstborn son.
Pharaoh was not merely a king. In Egyptian theology, Pharaoh was the living incarnation of Horus, the falcon-headed god, son of Osiris and Isis. The royal succession was a divine succession. When a pharaoh died, he became Osiris, the ruler of the afterlife. His son, ascending the throne, became the new Horus, the living god on earth. This cycle had been unbroken for over 2,000 years. It was the spine of Egyptian civilization, the continuous thread of divine authority connecting the gods to the people through the person of the king. The death of the crown prince severed that thread. The next Horus was dead. The divine succession was broken. Osiris, the god of the afterlife, the god whose entire mythology centered on conquering death, who had been resurrected by Isis's magic, could not protect a single sleeping child. Isis, who had literally reassembled Osiris's scattered body and breathed life back into it, whose magic was the most powerful force in the Egyptian supernatural framework, could not protect a single sleeping child. Meskenet, goddess of the birth chamber, who had attended the crown prince's birth, could not save him. Renenutet, protector of children, failed. Selket, scorpion goddess who warded off venomous death, was powerless against a death that had no venom, no blade, no physical form. And the final devastating detail, the Passover lamb. The lamb that the Hebrews slaughtered was a substitute, its death in place of the firstborn, blood for blood, life for life. This is the foundational concept of sacrificial atonement, a theology that would echo through Judaism into the temple sacrifices, and through Christianity into its central claim about the death of Christ. But in the immediate Egyptian context, the lamb was something else. It was an Egyptian god, killed by Hebrew slaves, whose blood was more powerful than every amulet, every spell, every prayer, and every deity in the Egyptian religious system combined. The blood of a lamb stopped the angel of death. The combined power of 2,000 Egyptian gods could not. Exodus 12, verses 31 to 32. During the night, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, "Up, leave my people, you and the Israelites. Go, worship the Lord as you have requested. Take your flocks and herds as you have said, and go, and also bless me." And also bless me. 3 words, the most devastating 3 words in the entire narrative. The living incarnation of Horus, the son of Ra, the divine mediator between heaven and earth, the god-king of the most powerful civilization the ancient world had ever known, asking a Hebrew shepherd, a man who stuttered, who had been a fugitive for 40 years, who represented a nation of brick-making slaves, for a blessing. The inversion was complete. The gods of Egypt were dead, their temples were unserviced, their priests were covered in boils, their sacred animals were rotting in the fields, their magic was broken, their sky had gone dark, their children were dead, and their king was begging the god of slaves for mercy. Exodus 12, verses 35 to 36. The Israelites did as Moses instructed and asked the Egyptians for articles of silver and gold and for clothing. The Lord had made the Egyptians favorably disposed toward the Israelites, and they gave them what they asked, so they plundered the Egyptians. The slaves plundered the masters. The Hebrew word is vainatzelu, and it means to strip, to despoil, to empty. The Egyptians handed over their wealth, not at sword point, but willingly, desperately, eager for the Hebrews to leave before the God of Israel killed everyone and everything that remained.
600,000 men on foot, besides women and children, plus a mixed multitude, Egyptians and others who chose to leave with the Hebrews, who had seen enough, who had watched their gods fall one by one and decided to follow the God who was still standing. They walked east into the desert, toward a sea that would part, toward a mountain that would burn, toward a covenant that would reshape the moral architecture of the Western world. Behind them, Egypt wept. Exodus 12, verse 12. Against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord. 10 plagues, 10 gods destroyed. The Nile, the earth, the sacred animals, the magic, the hair, the sky, the harvest, the sun, the throne, and the divine succession itself. It was never about frogs or boils or locusts. It was never about punishing a stubborn king, though that too was part of the story. It was a trial, a public, systematic, undeniable trial, in which every major deity of the most powerful civilization on the earth was called to account, found wanting, and destroyed, one by one, domain by domain, by a God with no temple, no statue, no priesthood, and no name that Egypt had ever heard spoken. The hidden war on the Egyptian gods was never hidden to those who knew how to read it. It was written in the water, and the dust, and the darkness, and the blood. It was written in the silence of Ra, and the weeping of Pharaoh, and the empty door frames where lamb's blood dried in the desert heat. And it has been read for 3,300 and counting by every civilization that came after. Because the empires always fall, the pantheons always crumble, the gods of bronze and gold and stone always go silent in the end.